A man rescues a freezing dog chained to a tree, hoping to give it a better life. But years later, after the dog has become his loyal companion, he gets a call that turns his world upside down. The voice on the other end claims the dog belongs to someone else, a person who will stop at nothing to get it back. How did the dog end up in the cold? And what happens when the truth about its past is finally revealed? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The winter wind howled outside Evan's garage, rattling the metal siding like angry fists against tin. Inside, the space heater hummed steadily, creating a pocket of warmth around his workbench. Evan's calloused hands moved with practiced precision over the carburetor he was cleaning. His eyes focused through the magnifying glass as he adjusted tiny parts with careful movements. The radio crackled on a shelf nearby, its volume low but clear enough to hear the weather alert. The National Weather Service has issued a winter storm warning for all of Madison County. Expect heavy snowfall and wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour. Travel is not recommended. Evan barely glanced up from his work. Montana winters were nothing new to him, and his modest house on the outskirts of town had weathered plenty of storms before. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal shavings filled the air as he worked, the routine as comfortable as an old pair of boots. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking his concentration. He wiped his hands on a shop rag before fishing it out, already knowing who it would be. His sister Kate's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," he answered, wedging the phone between his ear and shoulder as he picked up a wrench. "Evan, did you hear about the storm coming?" Kate's voice carried that familiar note of concern that always made him feel like he was still 12 years old. "Got the radio on right now," he replied, adjusting a bolt with practiced efficiency. "Well, make sure you've got enough supplies. And don't forget about dinner tomorrow night. The kids have been asking about their Uncle Evan." Evan's hands paused briefly over the carburetor. "Yeah, we'll see. Got a lot of work backed up here." "You always have work backed up," Kate sighed. "You can't spend every evening alone in that garage." "I'm not alone," Evan said, glancing at the radio. "Got plenty of company right here." "That's not funny, and you know it." There was a pause on the line. "Just think about coming, okay? We miss you." "I'll think about it," Evan replied, his standard response to most of Kate's invitations. He ended the call before she could press further, sliding the phone back into his pocket. The afternoon light was already fading when Evan realized he needed supplies from town. The storm was picking up, but he figured he had enough time for a quick run to the hardware store. He pulled on his heavy winter coat and locked up the garage. The drive into town was uneventful, but by the time Evan left the hardware store with his supplies, the weather had taken a sharp turn for the worse. Snow was falling heavily now, reducing visibility to just a few yards ahead. Rather than take the main road home, he opted for the old back road that wound through the woods. It was longer, but the trees would provide some shelter from the wind. The truck's headlights cut through the swirling snow as he carefully navigated the familiar curves. About halfway home, something caught his eye. A dark shape near an old cabin set back from the road. He almost drove past, but something made him slow down. The cabin had been abandoned for years, but that shape seemed out of place. Evan pulled over, leaving the engine running. The wind bit through his coat as he stepped out, snow immediately coating his shoulders. As he approached the cabin, the shape became clearer, and his heart sank. A German shepherd lay curled up against a tree, a heavy chain around its neck. The dog was partially buried in snow, its dark fur matted and frozen. It lifted its head weakly as Evan approached, letting out a pitiful whimper that was nearly lost in the wind. "Hey there," Evan said softly, approaching slowly with his hand extended. The dog's eyes were dull with exhaustion, but there was no aggression in them, just desperate need. As Evan got closer, he could see how badly malnourished the animal was, its ribs visible even through the thick fur. The chain was secured with a padlock, the metal frozen and covered in ice. Evan returned to his truck, grabbing his tools. Working quickly in the failing light, he used a pair of bolt cutters to break through the chain, his fingers growing numb despite his gloves. The dog didn't move when the chain finally gave way, too weak to stand. Evan shrugged off his coat, wrapping it carefully around the shivering animal. "It's okay," he murmured, not sure if he was trying to comfort the dog or himself. "I've got you." With gentle movements, he lifted the German Shepherd. The dog was big, but terrifyingly light in his arms. Snow pelted them both as Evan carried him to the truck, carefully placing him on the passenger seat. He cranked up the heat as high as it would go, and the dog's eyes closed as the warm air began to fill the cabin. The drive home seemed to take forever, with Evan constantly glancing over at his passenger. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, and occasionally he would open his eyes, as if checking to make sure Evan was still there. Once home, Evan carried the dog inside, laying him on a thick blanket near the fireplace. He worked methodically, gathering every spare blanket in the house and positioning space heaters to create a warm cocoon around the animal. He filled a shallow bowl with water, holding it carefully so the dog could drink without having to move. Hours passed. Evan sat on the floor beside the dog, watching as color slowly returned to its gums and its breathing became stronger. The German Shepherd's eyes, though still tired, followed Evan's movements whenever he got up to adjust the blankets or refill the water bowl. As midnight approached, Evan found himself wondering why he had even stopped. He wasn't a dog person, had never even had a pet. His life was organized around solitude, around the predictable rhythm of work and quiet evenings alone. But something about that chain, about the quiet suffering of the abandoned animal, had made it impossible to drive past. The dog shifted slightly, pressing closer to Evan's leg, and let out a soft sigh. Evan's hand moved automatically to rest on the dog's head, feeling the steady warmth returning to its body. Outside, the storm raged on, but in the quiet of his usually empty house, Evan kept his vigil, unable and unwilling to leave his unexpected companion alone. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting a pale light over the snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed world of white drifts and pristine silence. Inside Evan's house, the usual morning hum of electronics was noticeably absent. The power had gone out sometime during the night. Evan woke stiff from sleeping on the floor. His first instinct was to check on the German Shepherd who lay curled in his nest of blankets. The dog's eyes were open, watching him with cautious awareness. Though still weak, there was more life in those eyes than there had been the night before. "Morning, buddy," Evan said softly, his voice rough from sleep. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the blankets, a small gesture that somehow made Evan's chest tighten. He stood, stretching his aching muscles, and made his way to the kitchen. The battery-powered radio on the counter confirmed what he already knew. The storm had knocked out power to most of the county. Thankfully, his old gas camp stove would do for coffee. As he waited for the water to boil, Evan rummaged through his cabinets, finding some leftover chicken from a few days ago. He warmed it slightly and added some water to make it easier to eat. "Here you go, Duke," he said, setting the bowl down near the dog's head. The name had slipped out without thought, but it seemed to fit. There was something dignified about the animal, even in his current state. Duke lifted his head slowly, sniffing at the offering. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if each one required careful consideration of his remaining strength. Evan sat cross-legged nearby, sipping his coffee and watching as Duke managed a few small bites. Good boy," he murmured. "Take it slow." While Duke ate, Evan examined him more thoroughly in the morning light. The dog's fur was matted in places, and there were several cuts and scrapes visible through it. Most concerning were his paws. 2 of them looked particularly bad, the pads raw and discolored from exposure to the cold. "Think we need to get you checked out," Evan said, reaching for his phone. The local vet clinic was only a few miles away, and he knew Dr. Martinez usually came in early. The drive to the vet was slow, with Duke wrapped in blankets on the passenger seat. The dog seemed nervous about getting into the truck again, but Evan's quiet reassurance and gentle handling seemed to help. Every few minutes, Duke would turn his head to look at Evan, as if making sure he was still there. The vet clinic was quiet when they arrived, only one other car in the parking lot. Dr. Martinez met them at the door, her expression growing serious as she took in Duke's condition. "Bring him right back," she said, leading them to an exam room. The examination was thorough, with Dr. Martinez carefully documenting each injury. Duke remained remarkably still throughout, only whimpering slightly when she checked his paws. "The good news is that most of these injuries will heal with proper care," she said finally, straightening up. "The bad news is that he has moderate frostbite on 2 paws, and he's severely malnourished. The recovery process will be lengthy and potentially expensive." She paused, her voice softening. "If that seems like too much to take on, we could discuss other options. Humane euthanasia might be—" "He's staying," Evan interrupted, his voice firm. The words came out before he could even think about them, surprising himself with their certainty. Dr. Martinez studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right then. Let me get you set up with what you'll need." She left the room briefly to gather supplies, and Duke immediately turned his head toward Evan, letting out a soft whimper. Evan moved closer, resting his hand on Duke's head. "It's okay, boy. I'm not going anywhere." When Dr. Martinez returned, she had her arms full of supplies: antibiotics, special bandages for his paws, nutritional supplements, and detailed care instructions. She spent the next 20 minutes showing Evan how to clean and dress Duke's wounds, how to properly feed him to avoid complications from refeeding syndrome, and what signs to watch for that might indicate problems. "Call me if anything changes," she said as they prepared to leave. "And Evan? Thank you for saving him." The drive home was quieter, with Duke seeming more relaxed now that he knew they were heading back together. The snow had started falling again, soft flakes drifting lazily past the windshield. Back at the house, Evan spent the afternoon following Dr. Martinez's instructions, carefully tending to Duke's wounds and offering small amounts of food and water. The dog accepted his care with patient trust, watching Evan's movements with steady eyes. As evening approached, Evan realized they would need to figure out sleeping arrangements. The power was still out, and the house was getting colder. He gathered more blankets and pillows, building a comfortable bed next to the space heater he'd moved near the fireplace. The heater ran on propane, providing a steady source of warmth in the growing chill. "Here you go, Duke," he said, helping the dog settle onto the makeshift bed. Duke turned around 3 times before lying down, a surprisingly normal dog behavior that made Evan smile slightly. Evan stood looking down at Duke for a long moment, then grabbed another blanket for himself. He hesitated briefly before lying down nearby, close enough to keep an eye on Duke, but giving him space. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional crackle of the fire Evan had built in the fireplace. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, creating a peaceful backdrop to the evening. Evan had almost dozed off when he felt a slight movement. Opening his eyes, he saw Duke had inched closer, gradually closing the distance between them. The dog moved carefully, as if unsure of his welcome, until his head rested near Evan's arm. Evan lay still, watching as Duke's eyes drifted closed, feeling the warm weight of the dog's head against him. After a moment, he shifted his arm slightly, making it more comfortable for both of them. Duke let out a contented sigh, and Evan found himself doing the same. Through the window, the snow continued its gentle descent, coating the world in fresh white. But inside, in the warm circle of firelight, man and dog had found something neither had been looking for, but both perhaps had needed. The morning sun filtered through frosted windows as Evan measured out Duke's breakfast. A week had passed since that stormy night, and already the routine felt familiar. He mixed the soft food with warm water, just as Dr. Martinez had shown him, making it easier for Duke's recovering system to handle. "Here you go, boy," Evan said, placing the bowl on the floor. Duke approached carefully, his bandaged paws moving with growing confidence. The German Shepherd's coat was already looking better. Regular brushing had removed most of the matted fur, revealing a healthier shine underneath. He still moved slowly, but there was strength returning to his frame. Evan's phone buzzed. It was Mike from the auto shop, asking about the Henderson family's transmission repair. Evan glanced at his watch, then at Duke, who was taking measured bites of his breakfast. The dog needed his medication in exactly 2 hours. The timing was crucial for his recovery. "Tell them I'll get to it tomorrow," Evan texted back. He'd never delayed work before, but watching Duke eat with such care, he couldn't bring himself to leave. The dog needed consistency right now, and somehow that had become more important than anything else. Later that morning, after Duke had received his medication, Evan decided it was time for their daily walk. These short excursions were part of Dr. Martinez's recovery plan, gentle exercise to help rebuild muscle without overtaxing Duke's healing body. "Want to go out?" Evan asked, and Duke's ears perked up. He'd learned this phrase quickly, showing an intelligence that sometimes caught Evan off guard. They walked slowly down the quiet street, Duke matching his pace to Evan's careful steps. The snow had mostly melted, leaving patches of brown grass visible between remaining drifts. As they passed Mike's auto shop, Evan's coworker waved them over. "Looking better," Mike said, nodding at Duke. The German Shepherd sat automatically at Evan's side, maintaining perfect posture despite his injuries. Mike tilted his head, studying the dog. "He's definitely had training. Look at that sit. That's not natural behavior. Someone must have worked with him." Evan shrugged, trying to dismiss the observation. "Maybe. He's just smart." But Mike's words stuck with him as they continued their walk. Duke did show signs of formal training, the way he waited for permission before eating, how he walked perfectly at heel despite never being taught, his immediate response to basic commands. The thought that someone had once cared enough to train him made the chain and abandonment even more disturbing. That evening, after their dinner routine, Evan settled on the couch with some paperwork. Duke dozed nearby on his bed, the soft sound of his breathing mixing with the tick of the wall clock. The peaceful scene was suddenly broken by a whimper. Evan looked up to see Duke twitching in his sleep, his legs making running motions against invisible ground. The whimpers grew more distressed, and suddenly the dog jerked awake with a yelp, eyes wide and panicked. "Hey, hey," Evan said softly, sliding down to sit on the floor beside Duke's bed. "You're okay. You're safe." Duke's breathing was rapid, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something or someone. Evan remained still, speaking in low, soothing tones until the dog's panic began to subside. Eventually, Duke's breathing steadied, though he remained pressed against Evan's leg as if seeking reassurance. They sat like that for a long time, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. Evan found himself wondering what memories haunted Duke's dreams. What had happened before that chain and that tree? The next morning dawned clear and cold. Their walk took them down the familiar route, but this time Evan deliberately turned onto the back road that led to where he'd found Duke. He wasn't sure why he chose this path, perhaps hoping to understand something more about Duke's past. As they approached the abandoned cabin, Duke's demeanor changed dramatically. His ears flattened against his head, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. When they came within sight of the tree, he froze completely, every muscle tensed. The chain still hung there, a rusted reminder of cruelty. Snow had melted around it, leaving it exposed and ugly against the bark. Evan felt anger rise in his chest, not just at the chain, but at whoever had left it there, had left Duke there to die. Without hesitation, Evan walked to the tree. Duke watched, still growling softly, as Evan gripped the chain and yanked it free from its anchor point. The metal was cold and heavy in his hands. He walked to the nearby creek, its surface partially frozen, and hurled the chain as far as he could. It broke through the ice with a satisfying crack and disappeared beneath the dark water. When he turned back, Duke had stopped growling but remained alert, watching the spot where the chain had vanished. Evan walked back to him slowly, then did something he hadn't done before. He reached out and gently scratched behind Duke's ear. For a moment, Duke remained still. Then gradually, he leaned into Evan's touch, some of the tension leaving his body. His eyes, fixed on Evan's face, held a trust that made Evan's throat tight. They stood there together, man and dog, as the winter sun climbed higher in the sky. The creek gurgled softly behind them, ice cracking as it carried away the last physical reminder of Duke's past. The years had softened the edges of Evan's solitary life. Where his yard had once been bare and functional, flower beds now lined the walkway, their winter-dormant stems waiting for spring. The house paint was fresh, the gutters clear, and the garage, once solely dedicated to car repairs, now echoed with occasional barks and whimpers from its newest residents. Duke padded through the converted space with the confidence of a longtime resident, his gray-flecked muzzle the only sign of his advancing years. His once damaged paws now moved smoothly across the heated concrete floor, passing the row of temporary kennels where 3 rescue dogs waited for their forever homes. Evan had started small, taking in 1 or 2 strays at a time, but word had spread about the quiet mechanic with a gift for rehabilitating troubled dogs. Just temporary, Evan always said when people asked if he'd keep any of the Fosters. He gestured to Duke, who was never far from his side. "Got my hands full with this one." The German Shepherd had become something of a local celebrity. Children would point him out on their walks, and older residents would stop to tell stories about the day they first saw Duke. How thin he'd been, how far he'd come. Duke took the attention in stride, maintaining his dignified bearing while accepting gentle pats from familiar hands. Evan's routine had expanded to accommodate the shelter dogs, but Duke remained at its center. Every morning, they would still share that quiet moment over breakfast, Duke waiting patiently while Evan prepared his food, though he no longer needed the special mix from those early days. The bond between them had deepened into something beyond words, a partnership built on trust and shared history. On this particular Saturday morning, Evan was checking on a newly arrived rescue when he heard the crunch of tires on his gravel driveway. Duke's ears perked up at the sound of familiar voices, Evan's sister Sarah and her 7-year-old son Will. "Uncle Evan!" Will burst through the door, his winter coat unzipped despite the February chill. Duke met him with a gentle nudge, accepting the boy's enthusiastic hug with patient dignity. "Hey, buddy," Evan smiled, ruffling Will's hair. "Ready for our hike?" Will nodded eagerly. Sarah handed Evan a backpack filled with supplies. "He's been talking about this all week," she said. "Are you sure you don't want me to come along?" "We'll be fine," Evan assured her. "Duke knows these trails better than anyone." After Sarah left, they set out toward the hiking path that wound through the woods behind Evan's property. Duke led the way, his dark form a stark contrast against the patches of lingering snow. Will bounced along beside them, chattering about school and his latest video game achievements. The trail was well marked, but slippery in places where ice still clung to the ground. Evan kept a careful eye on Will, calling out warnings when the path looked particularly treacherous. Duke moved with practiced ease, occasionally pausing to look back at them, making sure they were keeping up. "Look, Uncle Evan!" Will pointed to a cluster of early spring flowers pushing through the snow. "Can I get closer?" "Stay on the path," Evan reminded him, but Will had already darted off, drawn by the splash of color against the white ground. It happened in an instant. Will's foot caught on a hidden root, and he stumbled sideways. The ridge, normally visible and easily avoided, was partially obscured by snow. Will's startled cry cut through the quiet forest as he slipped over the edge. Duke reacted before Evan could move. The German shepherd raced to the ridge's edge, his urgent barking splitting the air. Evan's heart stopped when he reached the spot where Duke stood. Will clung to a narrow ledge about 15 feet down, his small fingers gripping frozen earth and exposed roots. "Don't move, Will!" Evan called down, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I'm coming to get you!" But the ridge's edge was unstable, chunks of frozen soil crumbling away when Evan tested his weight. Duke suddenly left his side, moving along the ridge's edge with purpose. The dog stopped about 30 feet away, barking insistently. Evan understood immediately. Duke had found a safer descent point where the slope was less steep and the ground more stable. Years of trust made Evan follow without hesitation. "Hold on tight, buddy," Evan called to Will as he carefully made his way down the slope, Duke watching intently from above. The descent was treacherous but manageable. Evan could see why Duke had chosen this spot. There were natural footholds, and the ground was more solid here. Will's face was pale when Evan reached him, but he hadn't panicked. Evan secured his own footing on the ledge and carefully wrapped an arm around his nephew. "I've got you," he said softly. "Let's get you back up." The climb back was slow and careful. Duke's encouraging barks guided them to the safe ascent point, and when they finally reached level ground, Will collapsed into Evan's arms, shaking but unhurt. Duke pressed close to them both, his warm presence steadying and familiar. Will buried his face in the dog's thick fur, and Evan felt a surge of gratitude for the animal who had once again proved his worth beyond measure. They made their way back to the house, where Sarah fussed over Will, insisting on checking him for injuries despite his protests that he was fine. By evening, Will was curled up on the couch, exhausted but safe, while Sarah and Evan's brother-in-law discussed the day's events in low voices. After the family left, Evan settled into his office chair to check his emails before bed. Duke lay at his feet, a constant, comforting presence. The computer chimed with a new message notification. The subject line made Evan's fingers freeze over the keyboard. "I know that dog." He clicked the email open, his throat suddenly dry. A photo appeared, old and slightly blurry, but unmistakable. A German shepherd puppy stared at the camera, his markings identical to Duke's. The message below was brief but clear. "His name is Gunner. He was mine." Duke lifted his head at Evan's sharp intake of breath, those intelligent eyes fixed on his face with concern. Evan stared at the photo, then at the living, breathing dog beside him, the one who had just helped save Will, who had been his constant companion for 5 years, who had healed and grown strong under his care. The morning sun cast long shadows across Evan's kitchen table, where his coffee sat untouched, growing cold beside his laptop. His eyes moved between the screen and the framed photograph of Duke on the wall, a proud shot taken 3 years ago, the German Shepherd sitting tall in front of Evan's garage, his coat gleaming in the summer light. Duke himself lay near Evan's feet, occasionally lifting his head when his owner's distress became too apparent. The dog's presence was both comforting and unsettling as Evan studied the puppy photo from the email. The markings were undeniable. The same distinctive pattern around the eyes, the same slight notch in the left ear that Evan had always assumed came from an injury. "This doesn't make sense," Evan muttered, reaching down to scratch Duke's head. The dog leaned into his touch, a gesture so familiar it made Evan's chest tighten. 5 years of trust and companionship seemed to hover in the balance as he stared at his laptop screen. After 20 minutes of typing and deleting, Evan settled on a simple response. "Where did you get this photo?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then pushed back from the table. Duke followed him through his morning routine, feeding the shelter dogs, checking on a limping retriever that had arrived yesterday, fixing a leaky pipe in the kennel area. But Evan's thoughts kept drifting to the email, to the possibility that Duke had another name, another life before the snow and the chain. The reply came just after lunch. Evan's phone buzzed while he was changing the retriever's bandages. He finished the task with careful hands, though his mind was already on the message waiting in his inbox. Duke watched from the doorway, his expression somehow more solemn than usual. Back at his laptop, Evan opened the new email. The sender's full message filled his screen. "My name is Noah. I'm 15, and I live in Kansas with my mom and stepdad. That photo was taken when Gunnar was 6 months old. He was my dog, my best friend, really. I got him for my 10th birthday, but my stepdad, Ray, he didn't like him. Said Gunnar was too protective of me, too aggressive. But that wasn't true. Gunnar just knew when Ray was angry, when he might." The message paused there, as if the sender had struggled with what to say next. "Ray took Gunnar away when I was 12. Said he ran away, but I knew better. I heard him that night saying he was going to teach me a lesson. He chained Gunnar up somewhere cold. That's all he would say. I've been looking ever since. I saw your dog in the background of a photo on the Montana Rescue Network page. Someone shared a story about a mechanic who turned his garage into a shelter. The dog in the picture, he has the same markings as Gunnar, the same notch in his ear from when he caught it on a fence as a puppy. I know it's him. I'd know him anywhere. Please tell me if I'm right. Please tell me if he's okay." Evan read the message 3 times, each reading making his stomach twist tighter. The details were too specific to dismiss. The ear notch's origin, the timing of events. Duke would have been about 2 when Evan found him, plenty of time for someone to transport him from Kansas to Montana. He looked at Duke, who had settled into his bed in the corner of the office. The dog's eyes met his, calm and trusting, showing no sign of the trauma he must have endured between being Gunnar and becoming Duke. Evan thought about the nightmares that still sometimes plagued the dog, the way he'd growled at that chain in the woods, the instant connection he'd formed with Will, a child near Noah's age. The cursor blinked on his screen, waiting for a response that Evan couldn't bring himself to type. What would it mean for Duke to have this past suddenly surface? What would it mean for this boy, Noah, who'd been searching for his dog for 3 years? Evening crept in, painting the office in shades of purple and gray. Evan moved through his nightly routine mechanically, his mind still churning with questions. As he brushed Duke's coat, a daily ritual that had helped build trust in those early days, he noticed the dog's demeanor change. Duke's ears snapped forward, his body tensing slightly. He moved to the window, pacing back and forth, responding to some sound or presence outside that Evan couldn't detect. "You remember something, don't you?" Evan said softly, watching Duke's alert posture, the way his nose pressed against the glass. "Something from before?" Duke turned to look at him, and in the fading light, Evan could almost imagine him as that puppy in the photo. Before the snow and the chain, before the rescue and rehabilitation, before he became Duke. Later, sitting in his darkened office with only his laptop screen for light, Evan read Noah's message again and again. Each word seemed to carry more weight, more implications. Duke slept nearby, his breathing steady, while Evan sat in the quiet house, cursor still blinking, the weight of a response he couldn't yet form pressing heavily on his shoulders. The morning light filtered through Evan's office window as he clicked through his emails, scanning the carefully worded messages from Noah. Each one revealed a little more about the boy's life, though the details emerged slowly, like pieces of a puzzle being turned over one at a time. Noah's responses came at specific times, always between 3:45 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. on weekdays or early morning on weekends. Never in the evening. Never on Wednesday nights. The pattern wasn't hard to decode. These were the hours when Ray, his stepfather, wasn't home. Evan found himself checking his inbox more frequently than usual, especially during those afternoon windows. Duke seemed to sense something was different too. The dog spent more time near Evan's desk, his head occasionally rising when the computer chimed with a new message. "Another one from Noah," Evan murmured to Duke, who perked up at the sound of his voice. The message was typical of Noah's style. No abbreviations, no casual language, just clear, precise sentences that felt too mature for a 15-year-old. "I understand if you need more proof," Noah had written. "I would too if I were you." Evan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He'd been cautious in his responses, trying to balance his growing concern for Noah with the need to verify his story. After a moment's consideration, he typed, "If you have any other photos, that might help." The response came quickly, as if Noah had been waiting. A photo attachment appeared in Evan's inbox. He clicked it open and the image filled his screen. A small boy, maybe 10 years old, with sandy brown hair and a wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was hugging a German Shepherd puppy in front of a worn-looking trailer. The timestamp in the corner read July 15th, 5 years ago. Evan leaned closer to his screen, using his mouse to zoom in on the puppy's neck. The collar was weathered leather with a distinctive brass buckle, the same one Duke had been wearing when Evan found him in the snow. He'd kept it in a box in his garage, unable to throw it away despite its painful associations. Duke whined softly, pressing his nose against Evan's leg. The dog's eyes fixed on the screen, and Evan wondered if he recognized anything in the image. The boy, the trailer, that moment from his past life as Gunner. Moving to another tab, Evan began searching public records. The trailer in the photo had distinctive features: a small window air conditioning unit, chipped blue paint around the doorframe. It took less than an hour to find matches in a Wichita trailer park's rental listings. The address popped up: 1247 Riverside Lane, Lot 23, Wichita, Kansas. The registered tenant, Ray Moulton, age 49. Evan wrote down the information, his pen pressing hard enough into the paper to leave indentations on the pages beneath. The autumn afternoon stretched on as Evan sat at his desk, the information weighing heavily on his mind. Duke dozed nearby, occasionally twitching in his sleep. Finally, Evan reached for his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Hey, Mark," he said when his old high school friend answered. Mark had been with the Montana State Police for 15 years now. "I need some advice about a situation across state lines. It involves a miner's welfare." Mark's voice was professional, but concerned as he listened to Evan's carefully worded explanation. "Without a formal complaint or direct evidence of abuse, there's not much we can do officially," he said finally. "Kansas authorities would need probable cause to investigate. Does the miner indicate immediate danger?" "Not directly," Evan admitted, thinking of Noah's careful messages, the things left unsaid. "But the timing of his messages, the way he talks about his stepfather." "Document everything," Mark advised. "If you see any clear signs of abuse or immediate danger, call it in right away. But right now, our hands are tied legally." After hanging up, Evan sat in the growing darkness of his office. The shelter dogs had been fed and settled for the night, but Duke was restless. The German Shepherd paced near the back door, whining softly, a behavior that had been increasing lately, as if he sensed the tension building in the house. Evan's laptop screen glowed with Noah's last message. "I know it's a lot to ask. I know you probably think I'm just some kid making trouble. But Gunner, Duke, he was the only one who ever..." The message trailed off there, followed by, "I miss him every day." Duke's whining grew more insistent. Evan got up and opened the back door, letting the dog step out onto the porch. Instead of doing his usual circuit of the yard, Duke stood still, nose pointed toward the distant highway that led south, toward Kansas. Back at his desk, Evan opened a new message. His fingers moved across the keyboard, typing the words he'd been holding back. "Do you want me to come?" He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Duke returned from outside and settled at his feet, as if knowing something important had just happened. Together, they waited in the quiet house for a response, while outside, the Montana night grew deeper and colder. And somewhere in Kansas, a 15-year-old boy might be checking his email in secret, hoping for exactly this message. The morning air was crisp and sharp as Evan loaded the last supplies into his truck. He'd packed methodically: blankets, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and Duke's favorite bed. The German Shepherd watched from the front porch, his tail wagging slowly as Evan made one final check of his equipment. Evan's phone buzzed. His sister's name flashed on the screen. "You're doing what now?" Sarah's voice carried a mix of concern and confusion. "Helping out with a foster case," Evan said, keeping his tone casual as he tucked a map into the glove compartment. "Might be gone a few days." "Since when do you handle foster cases outside the shelter?" "Since now." Evan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Look, I can't explain everything right now, but it's important." Sarah sighed on the other end. "You're not in trouble, are you?" "No," Evan assured her, though his stomach tightened at the half-truth. "I'll check in when I can." After hanging up, Evan stood by the driver's side door, taking one last look at his house. The shelter dogs had been temporarily relocated to other foster homes, his garage locked up tight. Everything was in order, but something about leaving felt final, like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. He hadn't even opened the passenger door when Duke leaped through the open window, settling into his usual spot. The dog's eyes met Evan's, clear and determined, as if saying, "I'm ready when you are." They pulled out of the driveway before dawn, heading south on empty roads. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, but Evan barely noticed. His mind was on his phone, which sat silent in its holder, waiting for messages from Noah. The hours stretched on. They stopped only for gas and quick breaks, Duke staying close to Evan's side at each stop. The landscape changed gradually, Montana's rugged mountains giving way to plains, then to the rolling hills of Kansas. Every few hours, Noah's messages would come through. "Ray's at work. Everything's normal here. Be careful when you arrive." By the time they reached Wichita's outskirts, night had fallen. Evan's eyes were tired from the road, and Duke had grown restless in the last hour. They pulled into a modest motel on the edge of town, the kind with exterior doors and flickering neon signs. The room was basic. 2 beds, a small table, worn carpet. Duke immediately did a circuit of the space, sniffing corners while Evan set up his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing, "I'm nearby. I need to see you." The minutes ticked by slowly. Evan paced the small room, occasionally peering through the curtains at the nearly empty parking lot. Duke watched from his position near the door, ears perked at every passing car. It was almost 1 in the morning when 3 soft knocks broke the silence. Duke's head snapped up, but he didn't bark, just stared intently at the door. Evan's heart pounded as he looked through the peephole. A thin figure stood outside, hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn hoodie. Evan opened the door carefully, checking the parking lot before ushering the boy inside. Noah was smaller than Evan had expected. His frame was slight, almost fragile-looking under the baggy clothes. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, making him look older than 15. He stood just inside the door, shoulders hunched, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Then Duke moved. The German Shepherd approached slowly, his nose twitching. Noah stayed perfectly still, tears welling in his eyes as Duke came closer. The dog sniffed the boy's hands, then his legs, then looked up at his face. "It's him, isn't it?" Evan asked softly. Noah nodded, tears now falling freely down his cheeks. Duke pressed his head against Noah's leg, and the boy's hands finally emerged from his pockets to sink into the dog's fur. They sat on the edge of one bed, Duke between them, as Noah spoke in hushed tones. His voice was steady despite the tears, as if he'd practiced this story many times in his head. "Mom died 3 years ago," he began, fingers absently stroking Duke's ears. "Car accident, Ray. He changed after that. I mean, he was never great, but..." Noah swallowed hard before continuing. He started drinking more, getting angry about everything. Gunnar, Duke, he used to stand between us sometimes when Ray would get really mad. One night, Ray came home worse than usual. I'd gotten a B- on a math test, and he just lost it. Duke shifted closer to Noah, and Evan noticed how the dog's body was slightly angled, protective. "I woke up the next morning, and Gunnar was gone. Ray said he ran away, but I knew better. I knew he'd..." Noah's voice cracked. "I looked everywhere, posted online, but Ray caught me once, and..." He pulled up his sleeve slightly, revealing an old scar. "I had to be more careful after that." "How did you find us?" Evan asked gently. "I never stopped looking. I set up alerts for German Shepherds with his markings. When I saw that picture from your shelter's website..." Noah's hand trembled slightly as he touched the notch in Duke's ear. "I knew it was him. I'd know him anywhere." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound being Duke's steady breathing between them. "I don't want to take him back," Noah said suddenly, as if afraid Evan might think that was his intention. I needed to know he was okay, that Ray didn't." He couldn't finish the sentence. "And I need to get out," he added, his voice barely a whisper, "before Ray does to me what he did to Gunnar." Evan felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He looked at Noah, really looked at him, and saw beyond the careful facade to the exhausted, frightened kid underneath. "Listen to me," Evan said, his voice low but firm. "I need you to promise me something. Go back tonight. Stay safe. Can you do that?" Noah nodded, though his hands tightened in Duke's fur. "Promise me," Evan insisted. "I promise," Noah whispered. They talked a while longer, Noah sharing details about Ray's schedule, the layout of the trailer park, the neighbors who turned a blind eye. As the sky began to lighten outside, Noah stood reluctantly. Duke whined softly as Noah moved toward the door. The boy knelt down, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. "I missed you so much," he murmured into Duke's fur. Then he was gone, slipping away into the pre-dawn darkness like a shadow. Evan stood at the window, watching until Noah's figure disappeared completely. Duke pressed against his leg, and Evan felt something shift inside him, a decision crystallizing into certainty. The morning sun cast long shadows across the diner's worn linoleum floor as Evan sat across from Martha Chen, a retired social worker he'd found through an online rescue forum. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her small frame, she carried an air of quiet authority that came from decades of experience. She listened intently as Evan laid out everything: the rescue of Duke, Noah's emails, the midnight meeting at the motel. Her weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "The system isn't perfect," she said finally, setting down her mug. "But I've spent 30 years learning to work within it. And more importantly, I know people who still do." Evan leaned forward, his voice low. "Can you help?" Martha pulled out a small notebook, her handwriting precise as she made notes. "We need documentation, concrete evidence that we can take to CPS, school records showing unexplained absences or injuries, neighbor statements, photos of the living conditions." She looked up at Evan. "And we need to move quickly but carefully. One wrong step could make things worse for Noah. What do you need from me?" "Everything you have. Every email, every photo, every detail about your interactions with Noah. And," she hesitated, "we need recent evidence of Ray's behavior. The more current, the better." Duke, who had been lying quietly under the table, lifted his head at the mention of Ray's name. Evan reached down to scratch behind his ears, feeling the dog's tension. "I can do that," Evan said. They spent the next hour planning. Martha made calls to former colleagues, speaking in careful professional terms about a case of concern. She wrote down names and numbers, promising to start building a file immediately. "Give me your flash drive," she said. "I'll make sure it gets to the right people." After leaving the diner, Evan drove to the outskirts of the trailer park where Noah lived. He parked on a side street partially hidden by overgrown bushes. Duke sat up straighter in the passenger seat, his nose twitching at the familiar scents. They didn't have to wait long. A man emerged from one of the trailers, phone pressed to his ear, his face twisted in anger. Even from this distance, Evan could hear his raised voice. "I don't care what the school says," Ray shouted into the phone. "He's fine. Mind your own damn business." Duke's growl was low and deep, a sound Evan had never heard from him before. The dog's eyes were fixed on Ray, his body rigid with recognition. Evan placed a steadying hand on Duke's back, feeling the tremors running through the dog's body. Carefully, Evan raised his phone and started taking photos. Ray paced as he yelled, giving clear shots of his face, his aggressive posture, the beer can in his free hand despite the early hour. In the background, the trailer's broken windows and sagging steps were clearly visible. "Easy, boy," Evan whispered as Duke's growl deepened. "We're going to fix this." When Ray finally stormed back inside, slamming the trailer door hard enough to make the whole structure shake, Evan quickly sent the photos to Martha. He added a text. "Current conditions. Verbal aggression witnessed. Drinking at 10 a.m. That evening, Evan waited in the motel parking lot. The flash drive in his pocket felt heavy, loaded with every piece of evidence he and Noah had gathered. Martha had promised to deliver it personally to her contacts at CPS first thing in the morning, Noah appeared like a ghost between the parked cars, moving quickly and silently until he reached Evan's truck. Duke immediately pushed his nose through the open window, and Noah managed a small smile as he stroked the dog's head. "Ray's passed out," Noah said quietly. "I have maybe 20 minutes. They sat on the tailgate of Evan's truck, Duke positioned protectively between them. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a crease photograph, handling it with careful fingers. The photo showed a younger Noah, maybe 8 or 9, sitting cross-legged under a small Christmas tree. Gunnar, now Duke, was sprawled across his lap, both of them wearing Santa hats. Noah was beaming at the camera, one arm wrapped around the puppy's neck. "My mom took this," Noah said softly, running his thumb along the edge of the photo. "It was our last Christmas together, before—" He swallowed hard and held out the photo to Evan. "If anything happens, if this doesn't work, he's yours. Just make sure he's okay." Evan looked at the photo, at the happiness captured in that moment, then at the boy beside him, who had endured so much. Without hesitation, he pulled Noah into a tight hug. The boy stiffened for a moment, then gradually relaxed, his thin shoulders shaking slightly. "We're both getting you out," Evan said firmly, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of you. Together." Duke pressed against them, his warm presence a bridge between past and present, between who they had been and who they might become. For a moment, they stayed like that, man, boy, and dog, united in their determination to make things right. The morning sun beat down on Evan's truck as he sat parked halfway down the street from Noah's trailer. His fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel while he watched the quiet neighborhood through his side mirror. Duke lay in the back seat, occasionally whining softly as if sensing the tension in the air. Martha had briefed him thoroughly the day before. The welfare check would be a coordinated effort. Child Protective Services, local law enforcement, and a social worker would arrive together, unannounced. The element of surprise was crucial, she'd explained, to prevent Ray from having time to cover anything up or coach Noah on what to say. Evan's hands trembled slightly as he reached back to steady Duke, who had started shifting restlessly in the back seat. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own heart was racing. The weight of what was about to happen pressed heavily on his chest. He checked his watch again, 9:45 a.m. Martha had said they'd come mid-morning when Ray would likely be home, but before he'd had too much time to drink. The timing had to be perfect. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. A few kids rode their bikes in lazy circles at the far end of the street. An elderly woman watered her small patch of flowers outside her trailer. The normality of it all felt surreal, given what Evan knew was about to unfold. Duke's ears suddenly perked up, and Evan noticed it too. The subtle sound of vehicles approaching. 2 unmarked police cars and a civilian vehicle turned onto the street, moving slowly and deliberately. Evan's throat tightened as he watched them park in front of Ray's trailer. 4 officers stepped out, their movements careful but purposeful. A woman in professional attire, likely the CPS worker, emerged from the civilian car carrying a folder. They approached the trailer's rickety steps in formation, and one of the officers knocked firmly on the door. The response was immediate. Even from his position down the street, Evan could hear Ray's angry voice. "Who the hell are you?" The door flew open, and Ray stood there, his face already red with anger. The officers maintained their professional demeanor, explaining their presence calmly. But Ray's shouting only escalated. "You got no right! No damn right to be here!" His voice carried clearly through the morning air, causing neighbors to peek out their windows. Evan's muscles tensed as he watched Ray's body language become more aggressive. Duke started panting heavily in the back seat, picking up on the rising tension. The dog's nails scratched against the leather as he moved restlessly, clearly agitated. Then everything seemed to happen at once. Ray shoved one of the officers backward, causing them to stumble on the steps. In a flash, he reached for something on the porch, a rusty wrench that had been lying there. The officers' hands moved to their belts, voices rising in sharp commands. "Stay back!" Ray's voice cracked with rage as he brandished the wrench. "Get off my property!" Evan couldn't sit still any longer. He opened his door, his heart pounding, as he stepped out onto the street. Duke's barking became frantic, the sound echoing through the truck's interior as he scratched desperately at the windows. Ray's face was contorted with fury as he suddenly lunged toward the nearest officer, wrench raised high. The officer started to draw their weapon, but before anyone could react further, a gray blur shot past Evan. Duke had somehow managed to force his way out of the truck. He streaked across the yard with incredible speed, his powerful legs carrying him straight toward Ray. In one fluid motion, the German Shepherd launched himself at Ray, hitting him squarely in the chest. Ray went down hard, the wrench clattering away across the concrete. But Duke didn't attack. He simply held Ray down, his weight pinning the man firmly to the ground. His teeth weren't bared. He wasn't growling. He was just holding position, keeping Ray immobilized with practiced precision. The officers moved quickly, securing Ray's hands behind his back, while Duke maintained his steady pressure. Only when the handcuffs clicked into place did Duke step back, his eyes never leaving Ray, as the man was lifted to his feet. Through all the chaos, Noah had emerged from the trailer. He stood on the bottom step, shaking but unharmed, watching as his stepfather was led to one of the police cars. The CPS worker approached him gently, speaking in soft tones as she guided him toward the curb where he could sit down. Duke's entire demeanor changed the moment he saw Noah. The fierce protector transformed instantly back into the gentle companion Evan had come to know. The dog trotted over to where Noah sat and carefully laid his head in the boy's lap, his tail wagging slowly. Noah's hands automatically went to Duke's fur, fingers curling into the familiar coat. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he looked down at the dog who had once been his best friend, who had just protected him one final time from the man who had hurt them both. "He remembered," Noah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "After all this time, he remembered." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the Kansas Department of Child Services waiting room. Evan sat rigidly in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his work-worn hands clasped tightly together. Duke lay at his feet, his chin resting on his paws, but his eyes alert, tracking every movement in the hallway. The German Shepherd's ears twitched each time a door opened or closed. Martha, the social worker who had helped coordinate the morning's intervention, sat beside Evan. She shuffled through a stack of paperwork, occasionally making notes with a blue pen. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet room, marking each passing minute that Noah spent giving his statement in another part of the building. "How much longer?" Evan asked, his voice rough with concern. He hadn't slept properly in days, and the adrenaline from the morning's events was wearing off, leaving him drained but unable to relax. Martha glanced up from her papers. "These things take time," she said gently. "They need to get a complete statement from Noah about everything that's happened. It's important for building the case against Ray." Evan nodded, running a hand over his face. His stubble was rough against his palm. He hadn't bothered to shave in days. Duke shifted slightly, pressing his warm body against Evan's boots as if offering comfort. The door at the end of the hallway opened, and a woman in a gray blazer approached them. Her name tag identified her as Patricia Wilson, Child Welfare Supervisor. Her expression was professionally neutral as she took a seat across from them. "Mr. Harrison," she began, opening a manila folder, "I want to update you on Noah's situation." She adjusted her glasses and continued, "Given the circumstances and the evidence we've gathered, Noah will be placed in emergency foster care immediately. Kansas state law requires that we follow specific protocols in cases like this. Evan leaned forward, his shoulders tense. What kind of protocols? Noah needs to be placed with a licensed foster family within the state while we process his case, Patricia explained. We have several families who are prepared to take emergency placements. I want to take him, Evan said firmly, his voice steady despite the anxiety churning in his stomach. Duke's head lifted at the change in his tone. Patricia's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained professional. Mr. Harrison, while I understand your concern for Noah, there are several complications. First, you're not a registered foster parent. The process to become one typically takes several months of training, home studies, and background checks. I'll do whatever it takes, Evan interrupted. Classes, paperwork, whatever you need. Martha placed a supportive hand on his arm. Evan, there's more to consider. You live in Montana. That's crossing state lines. Interstate placements involve additional legal complexities and agreements between state agencies. Patricia nodded. Exactly. And with no prior parenting experience or established relationship with Noah before this week, it would be an uphill battle to convince the courts. Evan's jaw tightened. The same quiet determination that had driven him to rescue Duke from the snow years ago settled over him now. Listen, he said, leaning forward, that boy has been through hell. His dog, my dog, was taken from him and left to die as punishment. He's spent years searching, never giving up hope. I'm not giving up on him either. Duke lifted his head, his ears perked forward as if understanding the gravity of the conversation. Patricia studied them both for a moment before speaking again. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate your dedication, but the immediate priority is ensuring Noah's safety and stability. We have to follow proper procedures. Then tell me what those procedures are, Evan insisted. Tell me exactly what I need to do to qualify as a foster parent. I'll start today, right now. Martha intervened, her tone practical. I can help with this. I know the system, and I've seen Evan's character firsthand through this situation. He runs a small animal shelter, has a stable income, and has shown remarkable dedication to both Duke and Noah's welfare. Patricia made some notes in her folder. The first step would be completing an application for foster care licensing in Montana. You'd need to coordinate with your local Department of Family Services. There would be background checks, home studies, training courses. Give me the forms, Evan said without hesitation. All of them. For the next hour, they went through preliminary paperwork. Evan's hand cramped as he filled out form after form, but he didn't complain. Duke remained vigilant at his feet, occasionally pressing his nose against Evan's leg when his owner's anxiety spiked. Later that evening, Evan's truck pulled up in front of a modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The temporary foster home was clean and well-maintained, with neat flower beds and a small basketball hoop over the garage. Duke's tail began wagging as soon as they parked, recognizing Noah's scent nearby. The foster mother, Mrs. Chen, greeted them at the door. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had been fostering children for over a decade. She led them to the living room where Noah sat on a beige couch, looking small and tired in borrowed clothes. Duke immediately went to Noah's side, placing his head in the boy's lap. Noah's hand automatically went to the dog's ears, scratching gently. The familiar gesture made Evan's chest tight. "Hey, kid," Evan said softly, sitting down beside them. "How are you holding up?" Noah shrugged, his eyes fixed on Duke's fur. "It's okay here. Mrs. Chen is nice." His voice was quiet, uncertain. Evan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. "Got something for you." He handed Noah a basic prepaid phone. "It's nothing fancy, but it's got my number programmed in. You can call me anytime." Day or night, doesn't matter. Noah took the phone carefully, as if it might disappear. Really? Really, Evan confirmed. I mean it. Anything you need, anytime. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Duke's steady breathing the only sound in the room. All too soon, Mrs. Chen gently reminded them that it was getting late. Noah's hands tightened slightly in Duke's fur before letting go. As they walked back to the truck, Duke kept turning his head to look at the house, his tail hanging low. He whined softly when Evan opened the truck door, clearly reluctant to leave Noah behind. I know, boy, Evan muttered, helping Duke into the truck. He looked back at the house where a single light glowed in what he assumed was Noah's temporary room. We're not done, not even close. The Montana morning was crisp and clear as Evan's truck pulled into the parking lot of the local Department of Family Services. Duke sat in the passenger seat, his breath fogging the window as he watched the building with interest. Evan checked his watch, 15 minutes early for his appointment with Linda Matthews, the county's senior foster care advocate. He gathered the thick manila envelope from the back seat, filled with documents he'd collected over the past week. Background check forms, financial statements, property records, and the photos and emails from Noah. Duke followed close at his heels as they walked into the building, his nails clicking against the linoleum floor. Linda's office was small but welcoming, with plants on the windowsill and children's artwork pinned to a corkboard. She stood up to greet them, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun. Evan recognized her from community events. She had tried to adopt his nephew Will a few years back, before Will's parents reconciled. Evan, she said warmly, extending her hand, and this must be Duke. She knelt down to let Duke sniff her hand, smiling as he gave it a gentle lick. I've heard wonderful things about both of you from the sheriff. They settled into chairs, Duke lying down between them. Evan placed the envelope on her desk, his hand slightly unsteady as he opened it. I've brought everything I could think of, he said, pulling out documents one by one. The emails from Noah, photos of Duke when he was gunner, police reports from Kansas, character references. Linda listened intently as Evan explained the whole story. Finding Duke in the snow, the years of running the small shelter, Noah's first contact, and the dramatic rescue in Kansas. Her expression grew more serious as he described Ray's violent outburst and Duke's protective intervention. When he finished, Linda sat back in her chair, studying him thoughtfully. You understand this won't be easy, she said. Interstate adoption is complicated enough, but you're starting from scratch as a foster parent. Evan leaned forward, his voice firm but quiet. I'm not just doing this for the boy. I'm doing this for the dog, too. He glanced down at Duke, who lifted his head at the attention. They both deserve to heal together. They need each other. Linda's expression softened. She pulled out a thick binder from her shelf, opening it to reveal dozens of forms and checklists. Well then, let's get started. First, you'll need to complete the foster parent training program. It's 30 hours of classes spread over 6 weeks. For the next 2 hours, they went through the requirements step by step. Evan took careful notes as Linda explained each part of the process. Background checks, financial verification, home safety inspections, character references, psychological evaluation, and training certifications. The home study will be particularly important, Linda explained, showing him a detailed checklist. We'll need to verify that your house is suitable for a teenager. That means proper bedroom space, safety features, adequate supervision plans. Evan nodded, already mentally rearranging his house. I can start on that right away. Linda helped him fill out the initial application forms, her experienced hands guiding him through the complex paperwork. When they reached the reference section, she smiled. I already have some strong letters for you. Dr. Peterson, your veterinarian, sent one yesterday. She was quite eloquent about your work with rescued animals." She pulled out several more letters. "The sheriff wrote one too. Called you quiet but trustworthy. High praise from him. And your neighbors, the Hendersons, wrote about how you helped their daughter's therapy dog recover after surgery." As they finished the paperwork, Linda handed him a thick packet of information. "These are your homework materials for the first training session. Study them carefully. There will be evaluations." Evan took the packet, determination evident in his careful handling of the materials. "When can I start the classes?" "There's a new session beginning next Tuesday evening. I've already put your name on the list." Back home, Evan stood in his guest room, Duke at his side. The room had been largely unused, serving as storage for old car parts and boxes of paperwork from the shelter. Now he saw it with new eyes, seeing not what it was, but what it needed to become. He spent the rest of the day clearing the room, making trip after trip to the garage with boxes and old furniture. Duke followed him faithfully, his tail wagging with increasing enthusiasm as the space opened up. By evening, the room was empty, except for the basic bed frame and mattress. Evan drove to the hardware store, buying paint and a neutral blue-gray new curtains and safety equipment, smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, window locks, and a new doorknob with a proper lock. At the department store, he filled a cart with essentials: bed linens, towels, a desk lamp, and a small bookshelf. In the book section, he hesitated, realizing he didn't know Noah's reading preferences. He selected a variety of options: some classic adventures, modern young adult novels, and a few books about dogs and mechanical work, hoping something would appeal. Back home, he worked late into the night. Duke watched from the doorway as Evan installed the safety equipment, his tail thumping against the floor when Evan would stop to check his work. The new curtains went up, the bookshelf was assembled, and the desk was positioned near the window where the light would be good for studying. Around midnight, Evan sat down at his kitchen table, his laptop open. Duke rested his head on Evan's knee as he typed an email to Noah. "We're building something for you here. Hold tight. The room is almost ready. Just needs paint and a few more things. Started foster parent classes next week. Duke helped supervise all the changes today. He seems to approve. Remember, you can call anytime. Hope you're doing okay." He attached a photo of Duke lying in the doorway of the newly cleared room, his expression alert and expectant, as if waiting for someone to come home. Duke's tail wagged as Evan pressed send, the soft thump against the kitchen floor echoing in the quiet house. Evan reached down to scratch behind his ears, feeling the solid warmth of the dog's presence. "We're getting there, boy," he murmured. "We're getting there." The sharp whine of the snowmobile engine filled the garage as Evan adjusted the carburetor. Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor, had brought it in after it wouldn't start, and he'd promised to have it running before the next snowfall. Duke lounged nearby on his bed in the corner, occasionally lifting his head to watch Evan work. February sunlight filtered through the dusty garage windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Tools clinked against metal as Evan worked, his movements precise and practiced. The garage had changed over the past 2 months. One wall now displayed a collection of photos of various dogs he'd helped rehabilitate, and Duke's bed occupied a prime spot where he could watch both Evan and the door. The sudden ring of his phone cut through the mechanical sounds. Evan wiped his hands on a shop rag and pulled the phone from his pocket. Linda's name flashed on the screen, making his heart skip a beat. He'd been waiting for news about Noah's case. "Hello?" he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Evan." Linda's voice was warm and excited. "I've got good news. The Montana paperwork has cleared. We're approved for emergency placement." Evan's hands trembled slightly as he sat down on his work stool. Duke, sensing the shift in his energy, patted over and pressed against his leg. "What exactly does that mean?" Evan asked, absently scratching behind Duke's ears. "It means Montana has officially approved you as an emergency foster placement for Noah," Linda explained. "We just need Kansas to give us the green light for interstate transfer. Their social services department is reviewing the case now." Evan let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "How long will that take?" "Could be days, could be weeks. But this is a huge step, Evan. You've done everything right. The training, the home study, the background checks, the house modifications look great. We're almost there." After hanging up, Evan looked down at Duke, who stared back with those knowing brown eyes. "Hear that, boy? We're getting closer." He spent the next hour finishing Mrs. Henderson's snowmobile, his mind wandering to Noah. The boy had been calling regularly on the prepaid phone, usually late at night when his temporary foster parents were asleep. Their conversations were getting longer, more comfortable. Noah had started talking about school, about books he was reading, about his hopes for the future. By early afternoon, Evan had cleaned up the garage and headed to the courthouse. More paperwork needed signing, endless forms that seemed to ask the same questions in slightly different ways. The courthouse's heating system hummed quietly as he sat in the hard plastic chair, waiting for the clerk to process his documents. Through the tall windows, he watched an elderly couple walking their golden retriever through the snow. The dog bounded happily through the drifts, while its owners moved slowly but steadily along the cleared path. The scene triggered a vivid memory of that winter night when he'd found Duke. The way the German Shepherd had been huddled against that tree, chain frozen solid, eyes reflecting a mix of fear and desperate hope. Evan remembered how his hands had shaken as he worked to break that chain, how Duke's body had trembled against his as he carried him to the truck. He'd had no idea then how that one moment of compassion would reshape his entire life. The garage shelter, the fostering classes, the home modifications, none of that had been part of his plan. But now he couldn't imagine his life any other way. The clerk called his name, pulling him from his thoughts. More signatures, more dates, more promises to uphold the responsibilities of fostering across state lines. Evan signed each document carefully, reading every word despite having seen similar forms dozens of times before. The sun was setting by the time he got home, painting the snow-covered yard in shades of pink and orange. Duke greeted him at the door with his usual enthusiasm, tail wagging as Evan hung up his coat. They were halfway through their evening routine. Duke had been fed and was watching Evan prepare his own dinner when the phone rang again. Linda's number. Evan's hand shook slightly as he answered. "Hello?" "Pack your bags, Evan," Linda said, her voice bright with excitement. "Kansas just gave us the green light. You can go get your boy." The words hit him like a physical force. He sank into a kitchen chair, his legs suddenly weak. Duke immediately pressed against him, sensing the surge of emotion. "They approved it?" Evan's voice was barely above a whisper. "All the paperwork is in order. I'll email you the official documentation tonight. You can head down to Kansas as soon as you're ready. I've already contacted Noah's caseworker there to arrange the handoff." Evan looked at Duke, who tilted his head as if he understood the magnitude of the moment. The German Shepherd's eyes were bright and alert, his tail wagging slowly. "Let's bring him home," Evan said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Call me when you're ready to leave," Linda replied. "And Evan? You did it. You really did it." After hanging up, Evan sat in the quiet kitchen for a long moment, one hand resting on Duke's head. The dog leaned into his touch, offering silent support as he had so many times before. Together, they had created something neither of them had expected, a home that was ready to grow, to heal, to become something more than just a shelter from the storm. "What do you think, boy?" Evan asked softly. "Ready for Noah to come home?" Duke's tail thumped against the floor in a steady rhythm, his eyes never leaving Evan's face. In them, Evan saw the same thing he'd seen that night in the snow: hope, trust, and the promise of something better to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-dusted driveway as Evan loaded the last bag into his truck. He'd packed carefully, extra blankets, snacks, and Duke's favorite toys, though he knew this journey was different from their last rush trip to Kansas. This time, they weren't racing against time or hiding in motels. This time, they were bringing Noah home. Duke sat in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass. His tail wagged steadily as Evan climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The German Shepherd shifted closer, resting his head on Evan's thigh as they pulled out of the driveway. "Ready for a road trip, boy?" Evan asked, scratching behind Duke's ears. The snow was light, just a dusting really, nothing like the blizzard that had brought Duke into his life. The roads were clear, and the sky stretched endless and blue above them. As they passed the "Thank you for visiting Montana" sign, Evan felt a flutter of nervous excitement in his stomach. He'd made this drive before, but everything felt different now. The purpose had shifted from rescue to reunion, from uncertainty to hope. Duke dozed off and on as they drove, occasionally lifting his head to watch the landscape change through the window. His presence was steady and warm against Evan's leg, a reminder of how much had changed since that winter night when he'd found him chained to a tree. As they passed through small towns with their main streets and local diners, Evan's mind wandered back to his life before Duke. He'd been content with his solitude then, or at least he thought he was. His days had been simple: work in the garage, occasional dinner with his sister's family, quiet evenings alone. He'd built walls around himself without even realizing it, keeping the world at a safe distance. But Duke had changed all that. The dog had needed him, had trusted him despite his past trauma, and somehow that had cracked something open in Evan's heart. Working with other rescue dogs, converting part of his garage into a shelter. These weren't things the old Evan would have considered. And now here he was, driving across state lines to bring home a teenager he'd never imagined having in his life. Somewhere in Wyoming, they stopped for lunch at a roadside diner. As Evan shared his sandwich with Duke in the truck, he thought about Noah's life without his dog. 5 years was a long time, especially for a child who'd already lost so much. He wondered how different things might have been if Ray hadn't taken Duke, or Gunner, as he was known then, away. Would Noah have had some protection from his stepfather's abuse? Would the dog's presence have made those dark years more bearable? The miles rolled by, and Evan's thoughts turned to his own transformation. Without finding Duke that night, he'd still be alone in his house, fixing cars and avoiding connections. He wouldn't have known about Noah's suffering or had the chance to help. He wouldn't have discovered his capacity for caring about others, for fighting for something bigger than himself. They reached Kansas as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The social worker, Mrs. Patterson, met them at her office in Wichita. She was a stern-looking woman with kind eyes, and she smiled when Duke politely offered his paw in greeting. "Noah's very excited," she told Evan, leading him to her office. "But we need to follow protocol. He'll stay with his current foster family for 1 more week while we process the final paperwork for interstate transfer. It gives everyone time to adjust and make sure all the T's are crossed." Evan nodded, understanding the need for caution, even as his heart ached to get Noah home sooner. "Can we see him tonight?" "Of course. The foster family has invited you for dinner. They know how important this transition is." The foster home was a modest ranch-style house with Christmas lights still hanging from the gutters. Noah was waiting on the porch when they pulled up, his face breaking into a smile at the sight of Duke in the truck. The dog whined softly, recognizing Noah immediately, but stayed obediently by Evan's side as they approached. Dinner was a quiet affair, the foster parents, a kind-faced couple named the Hendersons, making small talk while Noah picked at his food, stealing glances at Duke, who lay patiently under the table. After the meal, Evan and Noah found themselves alone in the backyard, sitting on a wooden bench while Duke explored the unfamiliar yard. Noah's voice was barely above a whisper when he asked, "Will Duke still remember me?" Evan watched as Duke's ears perked up at the sound of Noah's voice, the dog's attention immediately turning toward the boy. "He'll remember," Evan said softly. "He never forgot you." The next morning, Evan and Duke arrived early at the foster home. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows across the frost-covered lawn. They waited in the driveway, Duke sitting alertly beside Evan, his tail sweeping gentle arcs in the morning air. When the front door opened and Noah stepped out, Duke's reaction was immediate. He bounded forward, all dignity forgotten, his whole body wiggling with excitement. Noah dropped to his knees in the driveway, and Duke pressed against him, licking his face as his tail wagged frantically. Evan stood back, watching the reunion unfold. Noah buried his face in Duke's fur, his shoulders shaking slightly as the dog continued to shower him with affection. Duke remembered every bit of his former owner, showing none of the hesitation he typically displayed with strangers. This was pure recognition, pure joy. When Noah finally looked up at Evan, his eyes were bright with tears, but his smile was radiant. "Thank you," he said simply, one hand still buried in Duke's fur. Crisp Montana sunlight filtered through Noah's new room curtains. After a week together, the once empty spare room now showed signs of teenage life. A backpack in the corner, scattered books, and carefully arranged photos. Evan watched from the doorway as Noah slept peacefully with Duke at the foot of his bed. The German Shepherd acknowledged Evan with a tail thump. These quiet moments still surprised Evan. How natural their little family felt. How quickly they'd established routines. Noah woke, smiling sleepily at his foster father. "Morning," he mumbled, scratching Duke's ears. "Breakfast in 10? Got those chocolate chip pancakes you like?" Noah brightened. "The ones with the whipped cream. Would I make them any other way?" Their mornings had an easy rhythm now. Noah helped set the table while Evan cooked, with Duke padding hopefully between them. They'd discuss daily plans, share jokes, or enjoy comfortable silence, so different from the tense quiet before. The neighborhood noticed the change in the once solitary mechanic. Mrs. Henderson brought a welcome casserole. Mr. Peterson offered Noah a weekend job, and the local vet clinic referred more rescues to Evan's shelter. One evening, they worked on a new dog pen in the backyard. Noah had designed it himself, measuring everything precisely. "Hand me that wrench," Noah asked while securing a bolt. Evan noticed how confident Noah's movements had become. The nervous Kansas boy was growing more self-assured. "You're getting pretty good at this," Evan remarked. Noah flushed with pride. "I like building things, making something useful." Evan understood completely. The same satisfaction he got from fixing engines, making broken things whole again. The shelter expanded beyond Evan's initial vision into a proper rehabilitation center. Volunteers arrived regularly, inspired by Duke's story and Noah's enthusiasm. The town vet provided free checkups, and the local pet store donated supplies. Noah thrived in this environment, connecting naturally with scared animals. He'd sit with new rescues for hours, Duke often joining him. Their center became known county-wide as a place for second chances, with Noah maintaining a wall of success stories. Nearly a year after Noah's arrival, They were doing their regular property check when Duke alerted near an old barn. Behind hay bales, they found a chained dog, shivering and fearful. Noah reached for bolt cutters, his hand steady as he cut the chain. He knelt in the snow. "It's okay. You're safe now." Duke moved closer, reassuring the frightened animal. Eventually, the dog allowed Noah to slip a lead around its neck. As they walked back, Noah looked up at Evan. "He needs a name." After a moment, he smiled. "I think I'll call him Gunner." Evan's throat tightened with emotion as Duke pressed against Noah's leg, tail wagging in approval. Together, they led Gunner toward safety, their footprints marking a path in the fresh snow. If you enjoyed the story of Evan and Duke, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to... If you enjoyed the story of Evan and Duke, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.